You have heard of Beijing's Temple of Heaven, but did you know the city also has a Temple of Earth? This quiet park once hosted China's most solemn state rituals, and the last Imperial ceremony took place in 1911. In ancient China, the monarch understood him as the son of heaven, because Earth was regarded as heaven's consort. The ruler, heaven's son, was also bound to Earth as a kingship tie. Therefore, he ordered sacrifices not only to heaven, but also to Earth itself, what we would call the planet, seeking the fertile soil, abundant harvest, and prosperity for both the agrarian empire and its farmers, as well as timely wind and rain. This is why Chinese rulers worshipped Earth alongside heaven. Before the reign of the Ming dynasty's Beijing Emperor, sacrifices to both heaven and earth were conducted together at what is now the Temple of Heaven. But Emperor Beijing, who inherited the throne as a relatively ordinary prince, was particularly eager to innovate in ritual matters to prove the legitimacy of his rule. He therefore separated the sacrifices. The Temple of Heaven was kept for heaven, while a new Temple of Earth was constructed about 10 kilometers to the north. At the same time, he established the Temple of the Sun in the east of Beijing and the Temple of the Moon in the west. This created a balanced system of 4 great state altars: heaven, earth, sun, and moon, surrounding the imperial capital. Moreover, ancient Chinese believed that the heavens were round, while the earth, defined by its 4 directions, was square. As a result, most of the structures at the Temple of Earth are square in form. By contrast, at the Temple of Heaven, the majority of the buildings are circular. For the emperor, performing the sacrifice at the Temple of Earth was actually a burdensome duty. He was required to kneel more than 70 times and kowtow over 200 times. Why such exhausting rituals? Let's take the Qing dynasty as an example and see how the emperor carried out the sacrifice to Earth inside the Temple of Earth. The annual sacrifice at the Temple of Earth was usually held on the summer solstice of the Chinese lunar calendar. 40 days beforehand, all those involved in the ceremony had to begin rehearsing the ritual procedures. At the same time, the Ministry of Rites submitted the full program of the sacrifice to the emperor. Only after his formal approval could the arrangements be carried out and the ceremony officially implemented. The first step was to prepare the ritual items. The place we see here is called the Shen Chu Ku, the divine kitchen and the storehouse. It was where the food offerings for the sacrifice were made ready. Here, cattle and sheep were slaughtered, and pastries were prepared for the earth god to enjoy. At the same time, the ritual vessels had to be thoroughly washed and set aside, ready to use in the ceremony. The second step was to await the emperor's arrival. 1 to 3 days before the sacrifice, the emperor had to stay inside the Temple of Earth, specifically in the Zhai Gong, or Hall of Abstinence. In Chinese, Zhai means fasting and purification, especially abstaining from meat. So while residing here, the emperor would close his eyes to rest, reflect on him, and avoid all rich foods. Typically, the emperor arrived at the Hall of Fasting 1 day before the ceremony, but in the Qing dynasty, Emperor Qianlong, to show his special reverence for the earth god, often came 3 days in advance. The third step was to invite the spirit tablets. Within the Temple of Earth stands a building known as Huangqi Shi, literally the hall of the Earth God. Instead, the principal spirit tablet of the Earth God, called the Huangdi Qi in Chinese, was enshrined. On either side of these main tablets stood the spirit tablets of 6 Qing emperors: Hardship, Hong Taiji, Shunzhi, Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong. In the usual hierarchy, these spirit tablets ranked immediately below the Earth God and were worshipped accordingly. Of course, only after an emperor passed away could his tablet be placed here. Behind them were the tablets of the spirits of China's famous mountains and rivers. These too had long been brought out to participate in the sacrifice. As soon as the temple arrived at the temple, preparations for moving these tablets began. On the eve of the ceremony, officials would carefully place the Earth God's tablets in a sedan chair and carry it to the altar. Smaller sedan chairs were then used to transport the Imperial tablets, along with those of the mountains and rivers, to the altar as well. All of this had to be completed during the night before the sacrifice. Step 4. Sounding the bell to open the rite. About 3 a.m. on the summer solstice, the bell at the Temple of Earth was struck to mark the formal start of the ceremony. Yes, this was a nighttime ritual. It began before dawn and ran until around 7 a.m., lasting roughly 4 hours. The emperor therefore had to rise shortly after 1 a.m. and sit in readiness for the opening signal. Step 5. The formal sacrifice. First, the spirit tablets of the Earth God, the Qing Imperial ancestors, and the deities of China's great mountains and rivers were all brought onto the altar. The altar itself is a two-tiered square platform, its primary color being yellow, the color symbolizing the earth. Along the sides of the first tier run channels that were once filled with water, representing the nation's great rivers. So the formal name of the altar is Fangze Tan. In Chinese, it means the altar belonging to the Earth God and to the spirits of mountains and rivers. All ceremony officials and court musicians were required to stand in their designated positions near the Fangze altar. 2. Presenting the offerings. The step was called Jingzu, or advancing the dishes. The emperor entered the Fangze altar from the main northern gate, ascended the platform, and presented fine foods for the spirit tablet of the Earth God. 3. The dance. Uniformed musicians and dancers, known as Yuesheng, performed ritual choreography for the Earth God. At the Temple of Earth, 64 dancers, arranged in 8 rows of 8, took part in the ceremony. By contrast, since the Temple of Heaven ranked above the Temple of Earth in usual hierarchy, the scale of musicians and dancers employed in its ceremonies was far greater. 4. Expressing reverence and making the offerings. In this stage, attending officials read aloud the prayer text. Sometimes the emperor himself would do so. After the prayer was proclaimed, offering of food and wine were presented to the Earth God, to the Qing Imperial ancestors, and to the spirits of China's mountains and rivers. This act of presenting offerings was performed 3 times, in total, to fully convey the emperor's respect and devotion to the Earth God. 5. Sharing the wine and sending back the spirit tablets. The emperor and officials would drink the ritual wine together, then the offerings were removed from the altar. Then, through solemn kneeling and prostrations, the spiritual tablets of the Earth God were respectively carried back to the Huangqi Hall, the Hall of the Earth God, together with the tablets of the Imperial ancestors and the spirits of mountains and rivers. This formal return of the tablets marked the conclusion of the ceremony. 6. Bearing the offerings. Because the Temple of Earth was dedicated to the Earth God, the remaining wine and food from the ceremony were not discarded. Instead, they were buried in a pit in the north corner of the altar grounds. This act, known as burial of the offerings, symbolized that although the food and wine were not consumed, they still returned to the earth and remained at the disposal of the earth god. For the emperor, this rite was physically punishing. From around 9 a.m. until 7 a.m., he had to kneel repeatedly. Records speak of dozens of kneelings and well over 200 prostrations. Aside from robust rulers such as Kangxi and Qianlong, and some middle-aged emperors in good health, the last 3 emperors, Tongzhi, Guangxu, and Puyi, often had princes or senior officials perform parts of the ceremony on their behalf. So why endure so much hardship? Unlike the Western tradition of church-state separation, countries such as China and Japan historically practiced a form of religious political unity. The monarch was not only the ruler of the realm, but also the high priest. For the people, the sovereign functioned both as a political leader and a supreme ritual officiant. To fulfill their priestly role, the monarch, acting as chief celebrant, performed repeatedly kneelings and prostrations, showing reverence to heaven and to the earth god. In 1908, the pilgrimage emperor of China, the Guangxu emperor, passed away. If you are interested in his mausoleum, Chongling, you can find it in my series on the Imperial tombs. After Guangxu's death, the throne passed to the Xuantong emperor, better known as Puyi. He was not yet 3 years old when he ascended the throne, and far too young to carry out such arduous ceremonies himself. At the summer solstice of 1911, the final sacrifices to the earth god in Chinese history was held. Puyi did not perform the ritual in person. Instead, it was carried out on his behalf by Prince Yu Maoling. Only 4 months later, the Xinhai Revolution broke out, toppling the Qing dynasty and giving birth to the Republic of China. According to the legal regulations of the late Qing, such state ceremonies should have been performed by the emperor's father, the regent Prince Chun Zaifeng. Yet Zaifeng was extremely cautious about handling his relationship with the young emperor. Even with the law on his side, he dared not openly act in the emperor's place at such a highly public ritual. Instead, he appointed Prince Yu Maoling to perform the ceremony on behalf of the child emperor. This reveals how careful and restrained the regent was. Indeed, it was precisely because of Zaifeng's cautious and risk-averse temperament that, when the Manchu Imperial House was finally forced to negotiate with the Republic of China, he did not oppose transferring state power to the new republic. After the Republic of China assumed full control of the country, the Temple of Heaven remained under the administration of the former imperial family. In accordance with the agreements between the Qing court and the new republic, it was not until 1925 that the site was taken over by the local authorities in Beijing, transformed into a public park, and opened to ordinary citizens. In the era of the People's Republic of China, The Temple of Earth gained a new cultural role. It became home to the famous Ditan Book Fair, held every year and widely known across the country. When I visited Beijing recently, I happened to come across this book fair. Its presence symbolizes how a former imperial altar has been fully integrated into public cultural life, a fascinating transformation of space and meaning. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. More stories on China's history, culture, traditions, and economy are on the way.